The sound of the train whistle pierced the late afternoon air as it pulled into Jerome, Arizona, its iron wheels screeching against the rails. Scarlett Howard clutched her handkerchief tightly, her knuckles turning white as she peered through the dusty train window at the bustling depot ahead. Her heart pounded against her ribs like a wild Mustang trying to break free from its corral. This was it. There was no turning back now. The year was 1885, and Scarlett had traveled over 2,000 miles from Boston to marry a man she had never met. The letters exchanged between them over 6 months had seemed promising. Xander Payne had described himself as a cattle rancher with a modest spread outside Jerome. His handwriting was neat and his words respectful. But what if the reality was different? What if he was cruel? What if the wild stories she'd heard about the untamed West were all true? As the train hissed to a complete stop, Scarlett remained frozen in her seat while other passengers bustled around her, gathering their belongings and making their way to the exits. The conductor passed by, tipping his hat. "Miss, we've arrived in Jerome. This is your stop." Scarlett nodded weakly, but still couldn't bring herself to stand. Her trunk sat heavily in the luggage compartment, packed with everything she owned in the world: her mother's silver hairbrush, 3 dresses, undergarments, her Bible, and the small collection of books that had been her only solace after her parents' deaths. "Miss," the conductor said again, more firmly this time, "we need to continue on schedule." With trembling hands, Scarlett gathered her reticule and stood on wobbly legs. The conductor helped her retrieve her trunk, and before she knew it, she was standing on the wooden platform of Jerome's depot, her trunk beside her, as the train pulled away in a cloud of steam and coal smoke. The air was hot and dry, nothing like the cool, damp springs of Boston. The sun beat down mercilessly, and Scarlett was immediately aware of the perspiration forming at her temples and beneath her high-necked traveling dress. The depot was smaller than she had imagined, a wooden structure with a sloped roof and a few benches outside. A handful of people milled about, but none seemed to be looking for her. Xander had promised to meet her. Where was he? Minutes stretched into an hour as the depot gradually emptied. Scarlett remained, perched anxiously on her trunk, scanning the dusty main street of Jerome for any sign of her intended husband. Each time a man appeared, her heart would leap, only to sink again when he passed by without a second glance. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Scarlett felt the first real pangs of fear. What if he had changed his mind? What if something had happened to him? What if this had all been a cruel joke? She had no money for a return ticket, and the thought of being stranded in this alien landscape was terrifying. A grizzled old station master approached, eyeing her with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "You waiting on someone, miss?" "Yes," Scarlett replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Mr. Xander Payne. He was supposed to meet me." The station master's face changed, his weathered features softening with what looked like pity. "Payne's ranch, you say?" Scarlett nodded, a sense of dread washing over her. "I'm sorry to tell you this, miss, but there was an incident out at Payne's place last week. Rustlers. Mr. Payne was injured. He's been laid up at Doc Sullivan's place." The world seemed to tilt beneath Scarlett's feet. Her fiancé was hurt, and here she was, alone in a strange town with night approaching. "Is he? Will he be all right?" "Can't say for certain. Doc's doing what he can." Scarlett swallowed hard, fighting back tears. I don't know what to do. I was to be married. I'm a mail-order bride, you see. And excuse me, madam." The deep voice came from behind her, and Scarlett turned to find herself looking up at a tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun. As he stepped forward, She could make out his features, a strong jaw shadowed with a day's growth of beard, intense blue eyes beneath the brim of a well-worn Stetson, and shoulders broad enough to suggest he was no stranger to hard work. "I couldn't help overhearing," the stranger continued, his voice low and gravelly. "I'm Xavier Porter. I worked for Xander Payne." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. "He sent me to fetch you when he realized he wouldn't be able to come himself." Scarlett felt a rush of relief, quickly followed by uncertainty. "You work for Mr. Payne. Why didn't you say something earlier? I've been waiting for hours." Xavier's expression tightened. "Had some trouble with my horse on the way in, just got here." His gaze moved to her trunk. "Is this all your belongings?" Scarlett nodded, suddenly aware of how little she had brought with her to start her new life. "We need to get moving if we're going to make it to town before dark," Xavier said, bending to lift her trunk with an ease that spoke of considerable strength. He started toward a wagon parked at the edge of the depot, but Scarlett didn't move. The reality of her situation hit her fully. She was being asked to leave with a stranger, to trust him implicitly in a land where she knew no one and had no recourse if things went wrong. Boston seemed impossibly far away, and for the first time, Scarlett wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. Xavier turned back when he realized she wasn't following. His brow furrowed as he took in her pale face and wide, frightened eyes. "Miss Howard?" he asked, setting the trunk down. "Is something wrong?" Scarlett clutched her reticule tighter. I don't know you, Mr. Porter. How do I know you really work for Mr. Payne, that you're taking me where you say you are?" A flicker of understanding crossed his face. "You're right to be cautious, miss. But I give you my word as a man that I'm taking you to see Xander. We'll go straight to Doc Sullivan's place where he's recovering." His words were reassuring, but Scarlett remained rooted to the spot. The station master had wandered off, and the depot was now deserted. The sun was sinking lower, casting long shadows across the platform. In the distance, she could see the scattered buildings of Jerome, lights beginning to twinkle in windows as evening approached. Xavier set her trunk down and approached her slowly, as one might approach a skittish horse. When he was a few feet away, he stopped and spoke gently. "Miss Howard, I understand your fear. You're in a strange place far from home, but night's coming on and it's not safe for a woman alone at the depot after dark." Scarlett bit her lip, knowing he was right but still unable to move. Xavier's expression softened further. "Look, I'll make you a deal. I'll take you directly to Doc Sullivan's in town. You can see Xander with your own eyes, and if you're not satisfied, the hotel's right across the street. You can stay there tonight and decide what to do in the morning." It was a reasonable offer, and Scarlett found herself nodding slowly. Xavier returned to her trunk and lifted it again. As he loaded it onto the wagon, Scarlett gathered her courage and approached. The wagon was simple but sturdy, with a bench seat at the front and two horses hitched to it, one a sturdy brown draft horse and the other a sleek black stallion tethered to the back. "That's Thunder," Xavier said, noticing her gaze on the black horse. "My personal mount. Had to borrow the wagon from town to accommodate your trunk." He offered his hand to help her onto the bench, but Scarlett hesitated once more. What if this was a mistake? What if Xander Payne was nothing like his letters? What if his injury was severe and he no longer wanted a wife? Xavier seemed to sense her thoughts. "Miss Howard," he said quietly, "I know this is difficult, but whatever happens, you won't face it alone. I ride with you." There was something in his voice, a steadfast promise that finally broke through Scarlett's fear. She placed her gloved hand in his calloused one and allowed him to help her onto the bench. As Xavier climbed up beside her and took the reins, Scarlett took one last look at the depot. The train was long gone, her old life with it. Whatever awaited her in Jerome, there was no going back. The wagon lurched forward, and they began their journey into town as the last rays of sunlight painted the western sky in hues of gold and crimson. Scarlett sat stiffly on the bench, maintaining a proper distance from the cowboy beside her, but she couldn't help noticing the quiet strength he exuded. "How long have you worked for Mr. Payne?" she asked, breaking the silence that had settled between them. 5 years, Xavier replied, his eyes on the road ahead. "Came west after the war looking for work. Xander gave me a chance when not many would." "The war?" Scarlett glanced at him with new interest. He didn't look old enough to have fought in the Civil War, which had ended 20 years ago. A shadow crossed Xavier's face. "I was young, too young probably, lied about my age to join up toward the end, saw things no boy should see." He fell silent for a moment, then continued. "Xander was a good boss, fair, worked alongside his men, never asked us to do anything he wouldn't do himself." The use of the past tense didn't escape Scarlett's notice. "You speak as if he's gone. The station master said he was injured, not." Xavier's grip tightened on the reins. "He's alive. But the rustlers did more than steal cattle. They burned the main house. Xander got trapped inside trying to save some of his papers and valuables. By the time we pulled him out, he shook his head. The doc says the burns are bad. He's fighting, but..." Scarlett's heart sank. She had come all this way to marry a man she'd never met, and now he might be dying. "Does he know I'm coming? Does he still want me to come given his condition?" "He knows," Xavier confirmed. "Asked for you specifically when he had a lucid moment yesterday. Said to make sure you were taken care of, no matter what happens to him." The implications of those words hung heavily between them as the wagon rolled into Jerome proper. The town was larger than it had appeared from the depot, with a main street lined with various establishments, a general store, a saloon, a bank, and various other businesses, most of them closed now as evening settled in. Xavier guided the wagon to a modest 2-story building with a sign that read Dr. T. Sullivan, Physician and Surgeon. A lamp glowed warmly in the front window, suggesting the doctor was in. "Wait here," Xavier said, setting the brake and jumping down from the wagon. "Let me check if the doc's receiving visitors." Scarlett nodded, clutching her reticule tightly as Xavier disappeared into the building. Left alone, she took the opportunity to observe the town more closely. Despite the growing darkness, she could make out the rugged beauty of the surrounding landscape, rolling hills dotted with scrub brush, and the distant silhouettes of mountains against the darkening sky. It was nothing like the crowded streets and brick buildings of Boston, but there was an untamed majesty to it that she couldn't deny. The door to the doctor's office opened, spilling warm light onto the dusty street. Xavier emerged, his expression grave. "Doc says we can see him, but only briefly." He's not having a good day." Xavier helped Scarlett down from the wagon, his hands strong and sure at her waist. Together they entered the doctor's office, a small waiting area with a few chairs and medical diagrams on the walls. A bespectacled man in his 50s, presumably Dr. Sullivan, greeted them with a solemn nod. "Miss Howard, I presume? Xander's mentioned you. I'm afraid he's in considerable pain today, so please keep your visit short. He's in the back room." Scarlett followed the doctor through a door into a small, dimly lit room that smelled of carbolic acid and herbal remedies. On a narrow bed lay a figure so bandaged and still that she might have thought him already dead if not for the shallow rise and fall of his chest. "Xander," the doctor said softly, "your fiancé is here. Miss Howard has arrived." The bandaged figure stirred slightly, and a low groan escaped from beneath the wrappings that covered most of his face. One eye, bloodshot and glazed with pain, became visible as he turned his head slightly toward the sound of the doctor's voice. Scarlett stepped forward hesitantly, unsure of what to say or do. This broken man before her bore no resemblance to the confident, capable rancher who had described his life and hopes in those carefully penned letters. "Mr. Payne," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Scarlett Howard. I came as we arranged." The eye focused on her with difficulty, and the bandaged head gave a slight nod. A hand, also wrapped in bandages, moved slightly on the bed cover as if reaching for her. Dr. Sullivan cleared his throat. He can't speak much because of the damage to his lungs from the smoke. "But he's been asking for you." Gathering her courage, Scarlett moved closer and gently took the bandaged hand in hers. The fingers twitched in response, and a muffled sound came from beneath the facial bandages. "What is he trying to say?" Scarlett asked, looking anxiously at the doctor. Sullivan leaned closer to Xander, listening intently to the labored whispers. "He's apologizing," the doctor translated. "Says he's sorry you came all this way to find him like this. Says—" The doctor hesitated, glancing at Xavier, who stood silently by the door. "Says Xavier will take care of everything." Scarlett looked from the doctor to Xavier, confusion clouding her features. "Take care of what, exactly?" Before anyone could answer, Xander's body suddenly tensed, and a terrible rattling sound emerged from his bandaged form. The doctor immediately moved to his side, pushing Scarlett gently but firmly away. "He's having another seizure. You both need to leave now." Xavier took Scarlett's arm and led her from the room as Dr. Sullivan began working frantically over his patient. Back in the waiting area, Scarlett sank into a chair, her legs no longer able to support her. The reality of her situation crashed over her like a wave. She had come to marry a man who was grievously injured, possibly dying, in a town where she knew no one except the cowboy standing awkwardly before her. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice small in the quiet room. Xavier removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "That depends on you, Miss Howard. The hotel across the street has clean rooms. You could stay there tonight. Think about what you want to do." "And what are my options, exactly? I have no money for a return ticket to Boston. No family to go back to even if I could." Tears threatened, but Scarlett blinked them away, refusing to break down completely. Xavier's expression softened. "Xander made provisions for you in case things didn't work out. He set aside money for your return journey if that's what you choose." Scarlett stared at him in disbelief. "He thought of that, even now when he's fighting for his life." "He's a good man," Xavier said simply. "Wouldn't want you trapped here against your will." Before Scarlett could respond, the inner door opened and Dr. Sullivan emerged, his face grave. "I've stabilized him for now, but I won't lie to you, his condition is deteriorating. The burns are severe and infection has set in. I'm doing everything I can, but—" "He's dying," Xavier said flatly, not a question but a statement. The doctor nodded sadly. "I'd be surprised if he lasts the week. I'm sorry, Miss Howard. I know this isn't what you traveled all this way for." Scarlett felt numb, unable to process the rapid turn her life had taken. Just this morning, she had been on the train, nervous but hopeful about meeting her future husband. Now that future had crumbled before it even began. "I think the hotel is best for tonight," Xavier said gently. "You need rest after your journey. Tomorrow we can discuss what comes next." Scarlett nodded mechanically, allowing Xavier to guide her from the doctor's office and across the street to a modest 2-story building with a sign proclaiming it the Jerome Grand Hotel, a rather ambitious name for the simple structure. Inside, a middle-aged woman with a kind face greeted them from behind a small desk. "Evening, Mrs. Reynolds," Xavier said, tipping his hat. "Miss Howard here needs a room for the night. She's just arrived from Boston." Mrs. Reynolds's eyes widened slightly. "You must be Xander Payne's fiancé." "We've all heard about you, dear. Such terrible timing with his accident." She reached beneath the desk and produced a key. "Room 4, upstairs on the right. It's our best room, has its own washstand and a view of the hills." Scarlett tried to summon a smile of thanks, but her facial muscles seemed frozen. "My trunk." "I'll bring it up," Xavier assured her. "You go on and get settled." With leaden feet, Scarlett climbed the narrow staircase to the second floor and found room 4. The key turned smoothly in the lock, revealing a small but clean room with a brass bed, a washstand with a porcelain basin and pitcher, a small writing desk, and a window that currently showed nothing but the darkness outside. She had just removed her hat and gloves when a knock at the door announced Xavier's arrival with her trunk. He set it at the foot of the bed, then stood awkwardly, hat in hand. "Thank you, Mr. Porter," Scarlett said formally, though the words felt hollow in her exhausted state. Xavier nodded, his blue eyes studying her with concern. "Will you be all right, Miss Howard?" The question, asked with genuine care, almost undid her composure. I don't know," she admitted, her voice threatening to break. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do now." Xavier's expression softened further. "Get some rest tonight. Things often look clearer in the morning light." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "I'll come for you at breakfast time if that's all right. We can talk more then." Scarlett nodded, not trusting herself to speak further. When the door closed behind him, she finally allowed the tears to come, sinking onto the edge of the bed as sobs racked her body. She cried for the future she had imagined, for the man dying across the street whom she would never really know, for her own desperate situation, and for the parents whose deaths had left her with no choice but to seek a new life through the mail-order bride advertisements. Eventually, exhaustion overtook her, and Scarlett fell into a fitful sleep, still fully dressed atop the hotel bed. Morning arrived with the muted sounds of a town coming to life, wagon wheels on dusty streets, the distant lowing of cattle, voices calling greetings to one another. Scarlett awoke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until the events of the previous day came rushing back. She rose stiffly, her dress hopelessly wrinkled from sleeping in it. After washing her face and hands in the basin, she changed into one of her 3 dresses, a simple blue calico that had been considered plain in Boston but seemed appropriate for the frontier town. She had just finished pinning up her honey-brown hair when a soft knock sounded at the door. Xavier stood in the hallway, hat in hand, looking as if he hadn't slept much either. "Morning, Miss Howard. I thought you might be hungry. Mrs. Reynolds serves breakfast downstairs." Scarlett nodded, suddenly aware of the hollow feeling in her stomach. She hadn't eaten since a hasty lunch on the train the day before. "Thank you, Mr. Porter. I'll be down in a moment." In the small dining room off the hotel lobby, several tables were occupied by what appeared to be traveling salesmen and other hotel guests. Mrs. Reynolds herself brought plates of eggs, bacon, and biscuits to their table by the window, along with strong black coffee that Scarlett found she desperately needed. "I checked with Doc Sullivan this morning," Xavier said, after they had eaten in silence for a few minutes. "Xander made it through the night, but he's not conscious anymore. The doc doesn't think he'll wake again." Scarlett set down her coffee cup, the reality of her situation settling over her anew. "So I'm truly alone here." "Not alone," Xavier corrected gently. "Like I said, Xander made provisions. He wanted to make sure you were taken care of." "What kind of provisions?" Scarlett asked, a note of suspicion entering her voice. She had heard stories of women lured west under false pretenses, only to find themselves in circumstances far worse than those they had left behind. Xavier seemed to sense her concern. "Nothing untoward, Miss Howard." Before he lost consciousness completely, Xander signed over some money to you, enough for a ticket back east if that's your choice, or to establish yourself here if you prefer to stay. Stay, Scarlett repeated incredulously. And do what? I don't know anyone here. I have no skills that would be useful in a place like this. That's not entirely true, Xavier said, his voice steady. Jerome's growing. The mines are bringing in more families. There's a need for a schoolteacher. I noticed from your letters to Xander that you were educated at a ladies' seminary in Boston. Scarlett stared at him in surprise. You read my letters to Mr. Payne. A flush crept up Xavier's neck. Not exactly. Xander often shared parts of them with me. He was proud of his educated Eastern fiancée. Said the town could use more civilizing influences. I see. Scarlett wasn't sure how she felt about her private correspondence being shared, but it hardly seemed important now. And what if I don't wish to be a school teacher? What if I want to return to Boston? Then I'll personally ensure you get safely on a train east, with enough money to establish yourself wherever you choose to go, Xavier replied without hesitation. But before you decide, there's something else you should know. Scarlett braced herself, wondering what other complications awaited her. The ranch, Xavier continued. Xander's spread. It's yours now. Mine. Scarlett nearly choked on her coffee. What do you mean? Xander changed his will after the attack, left everything to you. The house is gone, but the land, the remaining cattle, the bunkhouse where the ranch hands stay, it's all legally yours once he passes. Scarlett set down her cup, her hands trembling slightly. That's absurd. He doesn't even know me. Why would he leave everything to a stranger? You weren't a stranger to him, Xavier said quietly. Those letters, they meant something to him. He talked about you like he knew you, like you were already part of his life. And he was a man of his word. He promised you a home, and he meant to keep that promise one way or another. Scarlett was speechless. The idea that she could suddenly be the owner of a cattle ranch was so far removed from anything she had imagined for herself that she couldn't begin to process it. Of course, Xavier added, you'd need help running it. The remaining hands would stay on if you wanted. I'd stay too, oversee things until you decided what to do with the property. And if I decided to sell, Xavier's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Then that would be your right. The land alone is worth a considerable sum. You could go anywhere, do anything with that kind of money. Scarlett's mind whirled with possibilities. She had come west with so little, expecting to become a rancher's wife. Now she faced the prospect of being a ranch owner instead, or taking the money and forging an entirely different path. I need time to think, she said finally. This is all happening so fast. Xavier nodded, understanding in his eyes. Of course. Take all the time you need. In the meantime, would you like to see more of Jerome? Might help to know the place better before you make any decisions. The idea of exploring the town rather than sitting alone in her hotel room with her tumultuous thoughts appealed to Scarlett. Yes, I think I would like that. After breakfast, Xavier escorted Scarlett along Jerome's Main Street, pointing out the various establishments, the general store, the assay office where miners brought their ore samples, the small church that doubled as a schoolhouse 3 days a week, the bank where Xander had kept his accounts. It's smaller than I expected, Scarlett admitted as they walked. In Boston, you can walk for hours and still be in the city. Jerome's growing fast, though, Xavier replied. The copper mines are bringing in new people every month. In a few years, it might be a proper city. As they passed the saloon, a group of rough-looking men spilled out onto the boardwalk, their raucous laughter cutting through the morning air. They fell silent as they noticed Xavier and Scarlett, their eyes lingering on her in a way that made her instinctively step closer to her companion. Porter, one of them drawled, a tall man with a scar running down one cheek. Heard about Payne. Shame that. There was something in his tone that suggested it was anything but a shame to him. Xavier's posture stiffened beside Scarlett. Dawson, he acknowledged coldly. Didn't expect to see you back in Jerome. Thought the sheriff made it clear you weren't welcome. The man called Dawson smirked, his gaze shifting to Scarlett. And who's this pretty little thing? Don't tell me Payne ordered himself a wife. Man always did have more ambition than sense. Xavier's hand moved to rest on the pistol at his hip. Miss Howard is none of your concern, Dawson. I suggest you and your friends move along. The tension in the air was palpable, and Scarlett found herself holding her breath as the two men stared each other down. Finally, Dawson's smirk widened into an unpleasant grin. No need to get tetchy, Porter, just being neighborly. He tipped his hat mockingly in Scarlett's direction. Madam, welcome to Jerome. Sorry about your intended. Tragic how quickly fire can spread. With that cryptic comment, he sauntered off, his companions following with backward glances and snickers. Who was that? Scarlett asked once they were out of earshot, noticing how Xavier's hand remained near his pistol. Caleb Dawson. Xavier spat the name like it left a bad taste. Used to work for a rancher named Blackburn whose land borders Xander's to the north. Dawson was fired for stealing, then took to rustling. He's been suspected in several raids, but no one's been able to prove anything. A cold feeling settled in Scarlett's stomach. You think he had something to do with the attack on Mr. Payne's ranch? Xavier's expression was grim. I'd bet my life on it. But suspicion isn't proof, and Dawson's careful. Always has allies to vouch for his whereabouts when trouble happens. They continued their walk, but the encounter had cast a shadow over the bright morning. Scarlett couldn't shake the unsettling way Dawson had looked at her, or the implication in his words about the fire. Their tour eventually led them to the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open country. Xavier pointed to the distant hills. Xander's ranch, your ranch now, I suppose, is about 10 miles in that direction. The Broken Pea, it's called. And what's it like? Scarlett asked, trying to imagine the place that might become her home. Beautiful in its own way. Not as green as you're probably used to, but the land has character. Rolling hills, good grazing for cattle, a creek that runs year-round even in the dry season. The main house was something to see before the fire. Xander built it himself, added to it over the years. There was a note of genuine loss in Xavier's voice that moved Scarlett. You cared about him a great deal, didn't you? Xavier nodded, his gaze still fixed on the distant hills. He saved my life in more ways than one, gave me purpose when I had none, a place to belong. And now, Scarlett asked softly, what will you do if I decide to sell the ranch? Xavier was silent for a long moment before answering. Move on, I suppose. That's the way of things out here. Nothing stays the same for long. Something in his resigned tone tugged at Scarlett's heart. This man had already lost his employer and friend, and now faced the prospect of losing his home as well, all while maintaining a stoic facade and ensuring her comfort and safety. Mr. Porter, she began, then hesitated. Xavier, I want you to know that I won't make any hasty decisions. Whatever happens with the ranch, I would never leave you or the other workers without consideration. Xavier turned to look at her, surprise evident in his blue eyes. That's kind of you, Miss Howard. But you don't owe me or anyone else anything. Your future is your own to decide. As they made their way back toward the hotel, a commotion near the doctor's office caught their attention. Several people were gathered outside, and even from a distance, Scarlett could see Dr. Sullivan standing on the porch, his expression solemn as he spoke to the assembled townsfolk. Xavier's stride lengthened, and Scarlett hurried to keep pace. As they approached, the doctor looked up, his eyes finding them in the crowd, Without a word, Scarlett knew what had happened. "When?" Xavier asked simply when they reached the doctor. "About an hour ago," Dr. Sullivan replied, his voice heavy with fatigue. "It was peaceful at the end. He simply stopped breathing." Scarlett felt oddly detached, as if watching the scene from a distance. She had never really known Xander Payne in life. How strange that his death should affect her so profoundly. "The undertaker's been notified," the doctor continued. "Given the heat, we'll need to proceed with the burial quickly. Tomorrow morning, I think." Xavier nodded, then turned to Scarlett. "Miss Howard, if you'd prefer not to attend—" "No," Scarlett interrupted, surprising herself with her conviction. "No, I should be there. He brought me here, after all. The least I can do is see him properly laid to rest." The remainder of the day passed in a blur of preparations. Word of Xander Payne's death spread quickly through the small town, and Scarlett found herself the object of curious glances and whispered conversations wherever she went. The mail-order bride who arrived too late, it was the stuff of frontier tragedy. That evening, as she sat alone in her hotel room, there was another knock at her door. She opened it to find Xavier standing there, his expression grave but determined. "Miss Howard," he began, then seemed to reconsider his approach. "Scarlett, I need to speak with you about something important." The use of her first name startled her, but she stepped aside to allow him into the room, leaving the door properly ajar for propriety's sake. Xavier remained standing, too restless to sit. "I've been thinking about Dawson," he said without preamble. "About what he said this morning and the timing of his return to town. It's too coincidental. I believe he was directly involved in the attack on the ranch, and now that Xander is gone, I'm concerned he might have designs on the property." Scarlett frowned, trying to follow his reasoning. "But the ranch is legally mine now, isn't it? How could he possibly claim it?" "There are ways," Xavier said grimly. "Intimidation, for one. Make it so unpleasant or dangerous for you that you sell cheap just to be rid of the trouble. Or worse, arrange another accident that leaves the ownership in question." A chill ran down Scarlett's spine at the implication. "You think he would harm me?" Xavier's expression hardened. "I think Dawson is capable of anything if there's profit in it. And Xander's land is valuable not just for the grazing rights, but for the water access. In this part of the country, water is more precious than gold." "What can we do?" Scarlett asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "I can't simply hide in this hotel room indefinitely." Xavier paced the small room, his spurs jingling softly with each step. "After the funeral tomorrow, I think we should ride out to the ranch. You need to see the property, stake your claim properly. The hands need to know who they're working for now. And Dawson and his ilk need to understand that the broken P isn't undefended." The idea of riding out to an isolated ranch when there might be men plotting to harm her was terrifying, but Scarlett recognized the logic in Xavier's suggestion. If she was to have any hope of maintaining her claim to the property, or even selling it at a fair price, she needed to establish herself as its rightful owner. "Very well," she said after a moment's consideration. "We'll go to the ranch after the funeral." Xavier nodded, relief evident in his face. "I'll make the arrangements. We'll take the wagon, bring your trunk. The bunkhouse is intact, you can stay there until we sort out more permanent accommodations." With that decided, he bid her good night and left her to her thoughts. Scarlett sat on the edge of her bed, wondering at the strange turn her life had taken. A week ago, she had been a penniless orphan in Boston, embarking on a desperate gamble for a new life. Now, she was a property owner in Arizona territory, possibly being targeted by dangerous men for land she had never even seen. Sleep eluded her for most of the night, her mind racing with possibilities both terrifying and exhilarating. By the time dawn broke, she had reached a decision she would not be driven away by fear. Whatever the future held, she would face it head-on. The funeral was a simple affair, held at the small cemetery on the outskirts of Jerome. Despite Xander Payne having been a relative newcomer to the area, the turnout was impressive. Ranchers, townspeople, and all 6 of the remaining broken pea hands stood solemn-faced as the preacher spoke words of comfort, and the plain pine coffin was lowered into the dry Arizona earth. Scarlett, dressed in the darkest gown, she possessed a navy blue that would have to serve in place of proper mourning black, stood beside Xavier at the graveside. She felt the curious eyes of the assembled mourners on her, but kept her gaze fixed on the coffin of the man who, in death, had changed her life so dramatically. As the service concluded, people came forward to offer condolences, many introducing themselves to Scarlett with varying degrees of warmth. Some seemed genuinely sympathetic to her situation, while others regarded her with skepticism, the Eastern woman who had inherited a ranch she knew nothing about. "Miss Howard," a deep voice said, and Scarlett turned to find herself face to face with a tall, distinguished-looking man in his 50s. "Walter Blackburn, I own the Circle B north of Payne's of your property." Scarlett nodded politely, noting how Xavier stiffened beside her at the introduction. This, then, was Dawson's former employer. "Mr. Blackburn, thank you for coming today." Blackburn's eyes, sharp and assessing, studied her carefully. "A terrible tragedy, what happened to Payne. I understand you'll be taking over his operations." Before Scarlett could respond, Xavier cut in. "Miss Howard is still considering her options, Blackburn." A thin smile curved the older man's lips. "Of course. It's a lot for a lady to take on, especially one not accustomed to our ways out here. Should you decide the burden is too great, Miss Howard, I'd be happy to discuss purchasing the broken pea from you. Save you the trouble of finding another buyer." The offer, delivered with such casual confidence, raised Scarlett's hackles. "That's very considerate of you, Mr. Blackburn, but I haven't yet decided to sell." "No." Blackburn's eyebrows rose slightly. "Well, the offer stands. Think about it. A woman alone in these parts. Life can be difficult." The veiled threat wasn't lost on Scarlett. She straightened her spine, meeting Blackburn's gaze directly. "I'm not alone, Mr. Blackburn. I have loyal ranch hands and Mr. Porter here to assist me." Blackburn's gaze shifted to Xavier, and something cold passed between the 2 men. "Indeed. Well, good day to you, Miss Howard. I'm sure we'll be speaking again soon." As he walked away, Scarlett turned to Xavier. "I take it there's history there." "Blackburn's been trying to buy the broken pea for years," Xavier explained in a low voice. "Xander refused to sell, even when Blackburn offered well above market value. The creek that runs through your property continues north through Blackburn's land. He wants control of the water source." Scarlett watched Blackburn's retreating back thoughtfully. "And you believe he might have had something to do with the attack on the ranch, perhaps through this Dawson person?" Xavier's expression was grim. "I can't prove it, but the timing is suspicious." Xander had just refused Blackburn's latest offer a week before the attack. With the funeral concluded, Scarlett and Xavier made their preparations to depart for the ranch. The wagon was loaded with supplies from the general store, food, kerosene for lamps, and other necessities alongside Scarlett's trunk. As they were about to leave town, Dr. Sullivan approached with a small wooden box. "Miss Howard, these belong to Xander. I thought you should have them." Scarlett accepted the box, opening it to find a gold pocket watch, a simple gold ring, and a bundle of letters tied with string, her letters to Xander. "Thank you, Doctor," she said softly, touched by the gesture. "And thank you for all you did for him." Sullivan nodded sadly. "He was a good man." "I wish you could have known him." With those parting words, Scarlett climbed onto the wagon beside Xavier, and they set off toward the Broken P. The journey took most of the afternoon, following a rutted dirt road that wound through increasingly wild country. As they traveled, Xavier pointed out landmarks and explained aspects of ranching that Scarlett, with her city upbringing, found utterly foreign. "The cattle are mostly on the North Range this time of year," he explained. "Better grass there after the spring rains. We've got about 300 head left after the rustling. Not a huge herd by some standards, but quality stock. Xander was breeding for hardiness, not just size." Scarlett tried to absorb it all, knowing that whether she stayed or sold, understanding the value of what she now owned was essential. "And the hands? You mentioned 6 men," Xavier nodded. "Good men, all of them. Loyal to Xander. They'll be loyal to you too if you give them a chance." As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, they crested a hill, and Xavier pulled the wagon to a stop. "There it is," he said quietly. "The Broken P." Spread out below them was a valley cradled by gentle hills, a silver ribbon of creek winding through its center. A cluster of buildings was visible in the distance: a large bunkhouse, a barn, several smaller outbuildings, and the charred remains of what must have been the main house. "It's beautiful," Scarlett breathed, the vast openness of the landscape stirring something unexpected within her. After the confines of Boston's crowded streets, the sheer space was both intimidating and exhilarating. Xavier watched her reaction with an unreadable expression. "It's different from what you're used to." "Yes," she agreed, "but not in a bad way. There's a freedom to it." They continued down the hill, and as they approached the ranch buildings, several men emerged from the bunkhouse. They stood waiting as the wagon pulled up, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Xavier jumped down and helped Scarlett descend, then turned to the assembled ranch hands. "Boys, this is Miss Scarlett Howard. As you know, Xander named her his heir. The Broken P belongs to her now." The men removed their hats, mumbling greetings that ranged from polite to skeptical. Xavier introduced them one by one: Miguel, the Mexican cook who also handled the horses; brothers Tom and Sam Miller, who had been with the ranch since its founding; Jed, a taciturn older man who seemed to eye Scarlett with particular suspicion; young Billy, barely out of his teens but apparently a gifted tracker; and Isaiah, a former slave from Georgia whose quiet dignity immediately impressed Scarlett. "Miss Howard will be staying in the bunkhouse until we can arrange more suitable accommodations," Xavier informed them. "I expect you all to show her the same respect you showed Xander." "No offense, madam," Jed spoke up, his weathered face creased in a perpetual frown, "but what exactly are your plans for the Broken P? We got cattle need tending, decisions need making." It was a fair question, and one Scarlett had been pondering herself. Standing there, facing these men whose livelihoods depended on her decision, she knew she couldn't continue to equivocate. "I won't pretend to know the first thing about ranching, mister." She hesitated, realizing she hadn't caught Jed's last name. "Just Jed, madam." "Been so long since anyone used my family name, I near forgot it myself." "Jed, then," Scarlett continued. "I won't pretend to have your experience or knowledge, but I do know that Mr. Payne built something valuable here, something worth preserving. I intend to learn what I can, as quickly as I can. In the meantime, I'll be relying on all of you to continue your duties as before, with Mr. Porter overseeing operations." Her words seemed to ease some of the tension among the men. Miguel stepped forward, a slight smile breaking through his initial reserve. "The Senora will need food after her journey. I will prepare dinner." Scarlett thanked him, grateful for the small gesture of acceptance. As the men dispersed to their various duties, Xavier showed her to the bunkhouse, a long, low building divided into several rooms. The men, he explained, would move their belongings to one end, leaving the small room at the opposite end for her privacy. "It's not what you're accustomed to," he apologized as he showed her the sparse room with its narrow bed, rough wooden table, and single chair. "But it's clean and it's secure." "It will do fine," Scarlett assured him, touched by his concern for her comfort. "I'm not as delicate as I might appear, Mr. Porter." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "No, I'm beginning to see that you're not." That evening, Scarlett joined the men for dinner in the bunkhouse's common area. Miguel had prepared a hearty stew with fresh, baked bread, and despite the initial awkwardness, conversation gradually flowed more easily as the meal progressed. The men, prompted by Xavier, began sharing stories of their time on the ranch, of Xander's fair but firm leadership, of cattle drives and the changing seasons on the range. Scarlett listened intently, asking questions when appropriate, genuinely interested in understanding this world so different from her own. By the time the meal concluded, she sensed that at least some of the men's skepticism had softened. They might not fully accept her as their boss yet, but they were willing to give her a chance. After dinner, Xavier walked with her outside, the night air cool after the warmth of the bunkhouse. The stars above were incredible, more than Scarlett had ever seen, spread across the vast canvas of the sky like diamond dust. "It's overwhelming," she admitted as they stood gazing upward. "All of it. The land, the responsibility, the decisions I need to make." "You don't have to decide everything at once," Xavier said gently. "Take time to learn, to understand what you've inherited. The right path will become clear." Scarlett turned to look at him, his features half illuminated by the lantern light spilling from the bunkhouse windows. In just 2 days, this man had become her anchor in a storm of uncertainty. "Why are you helping me, Xavier? You could have simply told me about my inheritance and left me to manage on my own. It would have been easier for you." Xavier was quiet for a long moment before answering. "I made a promise to Xander that I'd look after you, but it's more than that." He turned to meet her gaze. "I've seen too many good things destroyed out here. The broken pea is worth fighting for, and you. You deserve a chance to decide your own future, not have it decided for you by men like Blackburn or Dawson." His sincerity touched something deep within Scarlett, a place that had been cold and lonely since her parents' deaths. For the first time since arriving in Jerome, she felt a flicker of hope that perhaps she could find belonging in this wild, beautiful place. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." Xavier nodded, his eyes holding hers for a beat longer than necessary before he looked away. "Get some rest. Tomorrow, I'll show you the rest of the ranch." Sleep came more easily that night, despite the unfamiliar surroundings and the narrow, hard bed. The sounds of the ranch at night, the occasional lowing of cattle in the distance, the soft whickers of horses in the barn, the rhythmic chorus of crickets created a soothing lullaby that carried Scarlett into dreamless slumber. Morning arrived with a cacophony of new sounds, men moving about, the clatter of cooking utensils as Miguel prepared breakfast, the creak of saddle leather as the hands prepared for their day's work. Scarlett dressed quickly in her simplest gown, realizing as she did that her Boston attire was woefully impractical for ranch life. She would need to visit the general store in Jerome soon to acquire more suitable clothing. After a breakfast of eggs, bacon, and strong coffee, Xavier saddled 2 horses for their tour of the property. Scarlett eyed the gentle mare with trepidation. She had ridden occasionally in Boston's public gardens, but always side saddle, and never for any significant distance. "I'm afraid I'm not much of a horsewoman," she admitted as Xavier helped her mount. "Thunder here is steady as they come," Xavier assured her, patting the mare's neck. "Just relax and let her do the work. She knows the way." The day that followed was one of discovery for Scarlett. Xavier showed her the extent of the broken Pitakes holdings, the grazing lands, the creek that provided precious water year-round, the small apple orchard Xander had started as an experiment, the abandoned silver mine that had been worked out years before, but still belonged to the property. They stopped for a midday meal beneath the shade of a cottonwood tree by the creek. As they ate the simple fare Miguel had packed for them, bread, cheese, and dried beef, Xavier explained more about the business aspects of ranching. "Cattle prices are decent right now," he said. "The herd we have left should bring a good return when we drive them to the railhead in the fall. Not as much as Xander had planned before the rustling, but enough to keep the ranch going." Scarlett tried to absorb it all, asking questions about expenses, potential profits, and the duties of each ranch hand. Xavier answered patiently, clearly impressed by her quick understanding of the financial aspects, if not the practical ranching knowledge. "You have a head for business," he observed as they remounted to continue their tour. Scarlett smiled slightly. "My father was an accountant. He taught me to manage the household books from an early age. He believed women should understand finance, even if society disagreed." "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," Scarlett said softly, a pang of grief still sharp despite the years since his passing. "I miss him every day." They rode in companionable silence for a while, cresting a hill that offered a panoramic view of the valley below. In the distance, Scarlett could make out the boundaries where the Broken P met neighboring ranches. "That's Blackburn's land to the north," Xavier pointed out. "The Circle B. Bigger operation than ours, close to 1,000 head of cattle, but his water access is limited. That's why he wants your creek. And if I sold to him," Xavier's expression darkened, "he'd control all the water in this valley. The smaller ranchers would be at his mercy. He could charge what he wanted for access, or refuse it altogether to drive them out and expand his own holdings." Scarlett considered this, understanding for the first time the true value of what she had inherited and the responsibility that came with it. No wonder Xander refused to sell. Xander believed in fair dealing, Xavier confirmed. He knew what Blackburn would do if he got control of the water. "That's why." He trailed off, a troubled look crossing his face. "Why what?" Scarlett prompted. Xavier sighed heavily. "That's why I'm more convinced than ever that Blackburn was behind the attack. With Xander gone, he probably figured the ranch would be sold off cheap, or that he could intimidate whoever inherited it into selling. He didn't count on me being so stubborn," Scarlett said with a wry smile. Xavier's answering smile held genuine warmth. "No, I don't think he did." They were making their way back toward the ranch buildings when they spotted a cloud of dust in the distance, approaching from the direction of Jerome. "Riders coming," Xavier said, his hand instinctively moving to the pistol at his hip. "Let's head back, quickly." They urged their horses to a faster pace, reaching the ranch yard just as the riders came into clear view. 3 men, led by Caleb Dawson, his scarred face twisted in a mocking smile as they approached. The ranch hands had noticed the visitors as well. Jed and Isaiah emerged from the barn, rifles in hand, while Tom and Sam appeared from the direction of the corrals, their stances wary. Xavier dismounted quickly, moving to help Scarlett down before positioning himself slightly in front of her as the riders pulled to a stop a few yards away. "Dawson," Xavier acknowledged coldly, "you're trespassing on Broken P land." Dawson affected an expression of exaggerated surprise. "Am I? Well now, I heard the ownership of this place was in question, what with poor Payne being dead and all." His gaze shifted to Scarlett. Unless the little lady here has decided to try her hand at ranching. He laughed, and his companions joined in. Scarlett stepped forward, ignoring Xavier's warning glance. The ownership is not in question, Mr. Dawson. The broken P belongs to me now, legally and completely. Your presence here is unwelcome. Dawson's amusement faded, replaced by a calculating look. Is that so? Well, Miss Howard, it is Howard, isn't it? I think you'll find that running a cattle ranch isn't quite like pouring tea in Boston. It can be dangerous work. Accidents happen. He gestured vaguely toward the charred remains of the main house. Fires, rustlers, all manner of misfortune. The threat was unmistakable. Xavier's hand tightened on his pistol. Say what you came to say and then get off this land, Dawson. Dawson smiled thinly. Just being neighborly, Porter. Thought the lady might want to know that Mr. Blackburn is still interested in purchasing this property. His offer stands, though I hear it might not be quite as generous as what he offered Payne. Land values, you know, they fluctuate. The broken P is not for sale, Scarlett said firmly, meeting Dawson's gaze without flinching. Not to Mr. Blackburn or anyone else. Please convey that message to your employer. A flash of anger crossed Dawson's face before he masked it with another smile. I'll tell him. But I should warn you, Blackburn's not a man accustomed to taking no for an answer. And Jerome can be mighty unfriendly to outsiders who don't understand how things work around here. Is that a threat, Dawson? Xavier demanded, his voice dangerously quiet. Dawson shrugged. Just stating facts. The lady should know what she's getting into. He tipped his hat mockingly toward Scarlett. Good day, Miss Howard. I suspect we'll be seeing each other again soon. With that, he wheeled his horse around, his companions following as they galloped away from the ranch, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Once they were out of sight, Scarlett released the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Xavier turned to her, his expression a mixture of concern and admiration. You stood your ground. Not many would have faced down Dawson like that. I meant what I said, Scarlett replied, surprised at her own conviction. I won't be bullied into selling, especially not to a man who likely had a hand in Mr. Payne's death. The ranch hands had gathered around them, having witnessed the confrontation. Jed, who had been the most skeptical of Scarlett's ability to run the ranch, gave her an appraising look. Reckon you might have some spine after all, madam. Coming from Jed, it was high praise indeed. Scarlett felt a small surge of pride at having earned even this grudging respect. Dawson won't give up easily, Xavier cautioned, addressing both Scarlett and the men. We need to be vigilant. Double the night watches, and no one rides out alone from now on. The men nodded their agreement, their expressions grim. They understood the threat better than Scarlett did. Dawson was dangerous, and his connection to Blackburn made him even more so. What about the cattle? She asked, remembering Xavier's explanation of the rustling that had occurred before the fire. We'll move them to the South Range, Xavier decided. It's closer to the ranch buildings, easier to keep an eye on them. It'll mean less grazing land, but better that than lose more to rustlers. The practical nature of ranch life was becoming clearer to Scarlett by the hour. Every decision had consequences, often involving difficult trade-offs. But she was learning, adapting to this new reality with a determination that surprised even herself. The remainder of the day was spent implementing Xavier's security measures. The hands moved the cattle to the closer grazing lands, while Xavier and Isaiah rode the boundaries of the property, checking for any signs of trespassers. By evening, a new routine had been established. 2 men would keep watch at all times, rotating through the night. Weapons were cleaned, loaded, and kept close at hand. The atmosphere at dinner was tense but resolute. These men had already lost their boss to violence, and they were determined not to lose their livelihood as well. After the meal, Scarlett retreated to her small room, exhausted from the long day in the saddle and the emotional strain of the confrontation with Dawson. She had just changed into her nightgown when a soft knock sounded at her door. "Who is it?" she called, hastily wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "It's Xavier." "May I speak with you for a moment?" Scarlett hesitated, aware of the impropriety of receiving a man in her bedroom, even with the flimsy door between them. But conventional Boston propriety seemed absurdly out of place here at the Broken P. "Just a moment," she replied, quickly pinning up her hair that she had let down for the night. She opened the door a few inches, finding Xavier standing in the dim hallway, his expression troubled. "Is something wrong?" "Not exactly wrong," he said, keeping his voice low to avoid being overheard by the other men. "But I've been thinking about your safety. After Dawson's visit today, I'm concerned. The bunkhouse isn't secure enough." Scarlett frowned. "What do you suggest?" "We could ride into Jerome tomorrow, stay at the hotel while we look into building you a proper cabin. Something small but defensible, away from the main buildings." The idea of retreating to town, of appearing to run away after her bold stand against Dawson, didn't sit well with Scarlett. "No," she said firmly. "I won't be driven off my own land. The men are keeping watch, and I trust in their vigilance." Xavier studied her face, seeing the determination there. "You're sure? It would only be temporary." "I'm sure. The Broken P is my home now. I won't be chased away by threats." A smile slowly spread across Xavier's face, transforming his usually serious features. "You know, when I first saw you at the depot, looking so lost and afraid, I never would have guessed you had this much grit." Scarlett felt a warm flush creep up her neck at his approval. "Neither did I," she admitted. "But it seems Arizona agrees with me." "It does at that," Xavier agreed, his voice softening. For a moment, something unspoken passed between them, an awareness that transcended their practical partnership. Then Xavier cleared his throat and stepped back. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll start planning for rebuilding the main house." "Rebuilding?" Scarlett echoed, surprised. "But that would be a significant expense." "A necessary one," Xavier countered. "A proper house makes a statement that the Broken P is here to stay, that its owner is committed to its future." The logic was sound, and Scarlett found herself nodding in agreement. "Very well. We'll discuss it tomorrow." "Good night, Scarlett," Xavier said softly, the use of her first name still new enough to send a small thrill through her. "Good night, Xavier," she replied, closing the door gently as he turned to go. Alone in her room, Scarlett sat on the edge of her bed, reflecting on the extraordinary turn her life had taken. A week ago, she had been a mail-order bride, traveling to marry a stranger out of financial necessity. Now she was a ranch owner, standing her ground against threats and planning for a future she had never imagined. And Xavier Porter. He was unlike any man she had ever known. His quiet strength, his unwavering support, his obvious respect for her decisions, all were qualities she had never expected to find in the wild Arizona territory. She told herself that her growing feelings for him were simply gratitude for his help during this difficult transition. But in the privacy of her thoughts, she admitted there might be more to it than that. With these contemplations swirling in her mind, Scarlett eventually drifted off to sleep. The distant sound of cattle and the occasional call of a night bird creating a strangely comforting lullaby. The next few weeks established a new rhythm to life at the Broken P. Each day, Scarlett learned more about the operations of the ranch, riding out with Xavier or one of the hands to check on the cattle, inspect fencing, or monitor water levels in the creek. She visited Jerome twice, purchasing practical clothing, split skirts for riding, sturdy boots, and cotton shirts, and discussing plans for the new house with the town's only carpenter. True to his word, Blackburn continued his campaign to acquire the broken P. First came a formal letter offering to purchase the property for a sum that, while substantial, was well below its true value. Scarlett declined politely but firmly. Next came rumors, spread through Jerome, questioning her ability to manage the ranch and suggesting that financial ruin was inevitable without male guidance. These, Scarlett ignored. Throughout it all, Xavier remained by her side, teaching, advising, but never undermining her growing authority on the ranch. The hands, initially skeptical, gradually accepted her leadership as they witnessed her determination and willingness to learn. Even Jed, the most doubtful of them all, began to show a gruff respect when Scarlett correctly identified a sick calf before he did, remembering what Xavier had taught her about the signs of illness in livestock. Construction on the new house began, a modest but sturdy structure being built on the foundation of the old one. Scarlett insisted on simplicity rather than luxury, a practical home suited to ranch life, with a few Eastern comforts like glass windows and a proper bathroom with a copper tub. It was during this period of relative calm that disaster struck again. Scarlett was reviewing the ranch accounts with Xavier one evening when young Billy burst into the bunkhouse, his face flushed with exertion. "Fire," he gasped. "The south pasture, someone set it alight." Xavier was on his feet instantly, Scarlett right behind him. Outside, the night sky had an ominous orange glow to the south, and the smell of smoke carried on the wind. "Get the men," Xavier ordered Billy. "Bring shovels, wet blankets, anything we can use to fight it, and hurry." As the hands scrambled to gather equipment, Xavier turned to Scarlett. "Stay here where it's safe." "No," Scarlett replied firmly. "This is my ranch. I won't hide while it burns." There was no time to argue. Xavier nodded tersely, and within minutes, they were riding hard toward the fire, the other men close behind. As they approached, the scale of the disaster became apparent. A wall of flame was advancing through the dry grass of the south pasture, driven by the wind directly toward the main grazing area where the cattle had been consolidated. "If it reaches the herd, we'll lose them all," Xavier shouted over the growing roar of the fire. "We need to cut a fire break, clear a strip of land wide enough that the flames can't jump it." The next hours were a blur of desperate activity. Scarlett worked alongside the men, using a shovel to clear vegetation, creating a wide swath of bare earth to halt the fire's advance. The heat was intense, the smoke choking, but she refused to stop, even when her arms ached and her lungs burned. Through it all, Xavier directed their efforts with calm authority, shifting men to where they were most needed, anticipating the fire's movement. His face was streaked with soot, his eyes red-rimmed from the smoke, but his focus never wavered. By dawn, they had succeeded in containing the blaze. The fire had burned nearly a quarter of the south pasture before it was stopped, but the main grazing lands and the cattle had been saved. Exhausted, covered in ash and sweat, the ranch hands slowly made their way back to the bunkhouse. Scarlett's legs felt like lead as she dismounted, her hands raw and blistered from hours gripping the shovel. Xavier helped her down, his own exhaustion evident in the slump of his shoulders. "You should have stayed behind," he said, but there was no reproach in his voice, only concern. "Your hands." Scarlett looked down at her blistered palms and gave a small, tired smile. "They'll heal, and I couldn't have stayed back, not when everyone else was fighting to save my ranch." "Our ranch," Xavier corrected softly, then seemed surprised by his own words. "I mean." "Our ranch," Scarlett repeated, holding his gaze. "Yes, I think that's right. Whatever happens here, we face it together." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of feelings that had been growing steadily over the weeks they'd worked side by side. But before either could speak further, Miguel approached with urgent news. "Riders coming," he reported, pointing to the east where a group of horsemen could be seen approaching in the early morning light. "Looks like the sheriff and some others from town." Sheriff Davis was indeed leading the group, his weathered face grim as he dismounted in the ranch yard. With him were several townsmen Scarlett recognized from visits to Jerome, including the banker, Mr. Hoffman, and Dr. Sullivan. "Miss Howard," the sheriff greeted her, tipping his hat. "We saw the fire from town and came to offer assistance, but it looks like you've got it under control." "Thanks to the hard work of everyone here," Scarlett acknowledged, nodding toward Xavier and the exhausted hands. "But I don't think it was an accident." The fire started in several places at once. The sheriff's expression hardened. "Arson, you're suggesting?" "I am," Scarlett confirmed. "And I believe I know who's responsible, though I can't prove it yet." "Blackburn," Xavier supplied, his voice tight with anger. "Or more likely, Dawson acting on his orders." Sheriff Davis sighed heavily. "That's a serious accusation, Porter. Blackburn's an influential man in these parts." "He's also a man who's made no secret of wanting this land," Scarlett pointed out. "First the attack that injured Mr. Payne, now this fire, both designed to devalue the property or force me to sell." The sheriff looked uncomfortable, clearly reluctant to move against a powerful figure like Blackburn without concrete evidence. "I'll look into it, Miss Howard." "That's all I can promise for now." Dr. Sullivan stepped forward, concern evident in his kind face. "In the meantime, let me tend to those hands of yours, and the rest of you should get some rest. Fighting a fire all night is exhausting work." While the doctor treated the various minor injuries sustained during the firefighting efforts, Scarlett spoke quietly with Mr. Hoffman, the banker. "This is the second attack on the Broken P in a month," she told him. "I need to know if the ranch can survive financially if these incidents continue." The banker considered her question thoughtfully. "The Broken P is fundamentally sound, Miss Howard. Xander built it well, invested wisely. You've lost some grazing land today, but not catastrophically so. If you can protect your herd and make a good sale at the fall drive, you should be secure for the coming year." His assessment was reassuring, but Scarlett couldn't shake the feeling that Blackburn would escalate his efforts. 2 attacks had failed to drive her off. What would he try next? After the sheriff and townsmen departed, promising to send word if they discovered anything about the origin of the fire, Xavier found Scarlett sitting alone on the porch of the half-built house, staring out at the distant smoldering remains of the pasture. "You should get some sleep," he said gently, sitting beside her on the rough wooden planks. "You've been up all night." "So have you," she countered, noting the exhaustion etched in his features. "Xavier, do you think it will ever end? These attacks, the threats?" Xavier was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Not until Blackburn either gets what he wants or is convinced he never will." "And how do we convince him of that?" "By standing firm. By rebuilding, by running this ranch successfully despite his interference." Xavier turned to look at her, his blue eyes intense despite his fatigue. "By showing him and everyone else that the Broken P.'s new owner is here to stay." Scarlett smiled faintly. "You have remarkable faith in me." "I have good reason to," Xavier replied simply. "I've watched you these past weeks. You could have sold out, gone back east with enough money to live comfortably. Instead, you stayed. You learned. You worked alongside men who have spent their lives on the range. You faced down threats and fought fire with your bare hands." His voice softened. "You're not the same woman who was afraid to leave the depot that day, Scarlett." The truth of his words resonated within her. She wasn't the same woman. She was stronger now, more certain of herself and her place in the world. And a large part of that transformation was due to the man sitting beside her, who had believed in her capability from the beginning. "No, I'm not," she agreed quietly. "And I have you to thank for much of that change." Xavier shook his head. "You had it in you all along. You just needed the chance to discover it." Their eyes met, and in that moment, the barriers of employer and employee, Eastern lady and Western cowboy, seemed to dissolve. Xavier reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, and brushed a strand of ash-streaked hair from her face. His touch was gentle despite his calloused fingers, and Scarlett found herself leaning slightly into his hand. "Scarlett," he began, his voice husky with emotion and exhaustion. "I know this isn't the right time with everything that's happening, but I need to tell you." A shout from the bunkhouse interrupted whatever he had been about to say. They both turned to see Isaiah striding toward them, his expression urgent. "Riders coming from the north," he called. "Looks like Blackburn himself this time, with Dawson and several others." Xavier was on his feet instantly, his hand moving to his pistol. "Get inside," he told Scarlett. "It's not safe." "No," Scarlett interrupted, rising to stand beside him. "I'm done hiding. This is my land, and I'll face Blackburn on my feet, not cowering inside." Pride flickered in Xavier's eyes, but concern still dominated his expression. "At least stay behind me." By now, all the hands had emerged from the bunkhouse, weapons at the ready. They formed a line in front of Scarlett and Xavier as the riders approached Blackburn in the lead, Dawson at his right hand, and 4 rough-looking men behind them. Blackburn reined in his horse a few yards away, his cold eyes taking in the scene: the exhausted, soot-stained defenders, the still smoking pasture in the distance, the partially constructed house. His lips curved in a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Howard," he greeted her with mock politeness. "I heard about your misfortune last night. Such a shame about the fire." "Isn't it?" Scarlett replied coolly. "Especially since it was deliberately set. Sheriff Davis is investigating as we speak." Blackburn's smile didn't waver. "Terrible business, arson. I hope the culprits are brought to justice." His gaze shifted to the damaged pasture. "Of course, this will make it difficult to feed your cattle. I understand you've already lost a significant portion of your grazing land." "We'll manage," Scarlett said firmly. "I'm sure you believe that," Blackburn replied, his tone patronizing. "But ranching is a difficult business, Miss Howard, especially for someone not raised to it. One setback can lead to another. Before you know it, you're facing ruin." Xavier stepped forward, his patience clearly at an end. "State your business, Blackburn, and then get off this land." Blackburn's expression hardened. "My business is with Miss Howard, not with a hired hand who's forgotten his place." "Mr. Porter speaks for me," Scarlett said, moving to stand beside Xavier rather than behind him. "Whatever you have to say, you can say to both of us." Dawson snickered at this, earning a sharp glance from his employer. Blackburn returned his attention to Scarlett. "Very well. In light of recent events, I'm prepared to revise my offer for the Broken P. The price I'm willing to pay is less than before, naturally, given the damage, but still fair." "The Broken P is not for sale," Scarlett replied, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "Not to you, not to anyone." Blackburn's facade of civility slipped, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "Be reasonable, Miss Howard. You're in over your head here. The fire was just a taste of what can happen in this territory. Rustlers, drought, disease, any one of them could destroy what's left of this ranch. Take the money while it's still offered. Go back east where you belong." The implied threat was unmistakable. Scarlett felt Xavier tense beside her, saw the ranch hands tighten their grips on their weapons. One wrong move, and the confrontation could explode into violence. Drawing on a well of courage she hadn't known she possessed until coming to Arizona, Scarlett stepped forward, her gaze locked with Blackburn's. "Let me be perfectly clear, Mr. Blackburn. I know you were behind the attack that killed Xander Payne. I know you ordered Dawson to set the fire last night, and I know you won't stop until you have control of the water rights that come with this land." Blackburn's face remained impassive, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. "But here's what you don't know," Scarlett continued. "I'm not leaving. Not now, not ever. The Broken P is my home, these men are my family, and this land is my future. You can threaten, you can scheme, you can attack us again and again, but I will rebuild every time. And one day I will prove what you've done, and you will face justice for it." A heavy silence fell over the ranch yard. The ranch hands stood a little straighter, their expressions a mixture of surprise and newfound respect for their employer. Xavier's eyes never left Blackburn, his hand still resting on his pistol, but a hint of a smile played at the corners of his mouth. Blackburn's cold mask finally cracked, revealing a flash of genuine anger. "You're making a mistake, Miss Howard, a potentially fatal one." "The only mistake would be giving in to a man like you," Scarlett replied evenly. For a tense moment, it seemed Blackburn might order his men to attack then and there. But after exchanging a glance with Dawson, he apparently thought better of it. 7 armed defenders, even exhausted ones, presented poor odds. "This isn't over," he said finally, his voice hard as flint. "Not by a long shot." With that, he wheeled his horse around and galloped away, his men following close behind. Only Dawson lingered for a moment, his scarred face twisted in a malevolent smile. "Sleep light, Miss Howard," he called before spurring his horse after the others. When they were out of sight, Scarlett's knees finally buckled, the adrenaline that had kept her upright during the confrontation draining away. Xavier caught her before she could fall, his arms strong around her waist. "That," he said softly, "was either the bravest or the most foolhardy thing I've ever witnessed." Scarlett managed a weak smile. "Perhaps a bit of both." The ranch hands gathered around them, their previous reserve melting away in the face of Scarlett's courageous stand. Jed, who had been the most skeptical of them all, removed his hat in a gesture of respect. "Reckon we've got ourselves a real rancher after all," he declared. "Anyone willing to face down Blackburn like that has earned the right to run the Broken P." The others murmured their agreement, and Scarlett felt a surge of emotion at their acceptance. These men, so different from anyone she had known in Boston, had become important to her in ways she couldn't have imagined when she first arrived in Jerome. "Thank you," she said simply. "All of you. I couldn't ask for better men to stand with me." Xavier still had his arm around her waist, supporting her as fatigue threatened to overcome her again. "Now will you get some rest?" he asked, his tone gently teasing despite the seriousness of the situation. Scarlett nodded, too exhausted to argue. As Xavier helped her back to the bunkhouse, she leaned into his strength, grateful for his steady presence. Whatever Blackburn planned next, she knew she wouldn't face it alone. The weeks that followed were a testament to the resilience of the Broken P and its people. The burned pasture began to recover faster than expected thanks to unexpected late summer rains. The new house progressed steadily, its sturdy walls and solid roof a visible symbol of permanence and determination. And the cattle, though confined to smaller grazing areas than before, remained healthy and continued to grow. Blackburn made no further direct moves against the ranch, but his influence was felt in other ways. Merchants in Jerome suddenly became reluctant to extend credit to the Broken P. The banker, Mr. Hoffman, apologetically informed Scarlett that the loan she had requested for additional fencing would need to be delayed. And rumors continued to circulate about the Eastern woman playing at being a rancher, suggesting it was only a matter of time before she failed or gave up. Through it all, Scarlett remained resolute, adapting to each new challenge with growing confidence. She rode the range daily with Xavier or one of the hands, learning the practical aspects of cattle ranching that no book could teach. She kept meticulous accounts, finding ways to economize without compromising the quality of the operation. And gradually, she began to win over the townspeople of Jerome with her persistence and genuine interest in the community. Xavier was her constant support, teaching without condescension, advising without controlling, standing beside her through every difficulty. Their relationship evolved from employer and employee to true partners, each respecting the other's strengths and compensating for weaknesses. And beneath the practical partnership, something deeper continued to grow, a connection neither had spoken aloud since the interrupted moment after the fire, but which was evident in every shared glance, every brush of hands when passing tools, every late-night conversation on the porch of the nearly completed house. It was during one such evening, with the first hint of autumn coolness in the air, that Xavier finally broached the subject that had been on both their minds. "The house will be finished by the end of the week," he observed, leaning against the porch railing as Scarlett sat in one of the new rocking chairs they had purchased in Jerome. "It's turned out well." Scarlett nodded, looking up at the solid structure with its glass windows and wooden shutters, its stone chimney and broad front porch. "It has. Different from what Xander built, but still good. You'll be comfortable here," Xavier continued. Proper privacy at last, after months in that cramped room in the bunkhouse. There was something in his tone that made Scarlett study his face more closely in the fading light. "You sound as if you're saying goodbye, Xavier." He didn't meet her eyes, his gaze fixed on the distant hills. "I've been thinking. With the house finished, the cattle doing well, the hands settled, maybe it's time I moved on." Scarlett felt as if all the air had been sucked from her lungs. "Moved on? Why would you do that?" Xavier turned to look at her then, his blue eyes troubled. "Because staying is getting harder every day." "I don't understand," Scarlett said, rising from her chair to stand beside him at the railing. "Have I done something wrong? Are you unhappy here?" "No," Xavier said quickly. "God, no, that's not it at all." He ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture Scarlett had come to recognize as a sign of internal struggle. "It's not about unhappiness, Scarlett. It's about feelings I shouldn't have." Understanding dawned slowly, hope rising with it. "Feelings for me, you mean?" Xavier nodded, his expression pained. "You're my employer. More than that, you were meant to be another man's wife. I had no right to." He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Scarlett placed her hand gently on his arm. "Xavier, look at me." When he did, she continued softly. "I came to Arizona as a mail-order bride, yes. I agreed to marry a man I'd never met because I had few options left. I might have grown to care for Xander Payne in time, but we both know that's not the same as love. And now?" Xavier asked, a hint of vulnerability in his voice that she'd never heard before. "Now, I find myself caring deeply for a man who has stood beside me through the hardest months of my life. A man who has taught me, protected me, respected me, and never once made me feel that I was less capable because I'm a woman." Scarlett took a deep breath. "I'm not Xander's widow, Xavier. I'm a woman who has found her place in the world and found someone I want to share that place with." Xavier's expression transformed, hope replacing the resignation that had been there moments before. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to withdraw, he raised his hand to cup her cheek. "Are you certain? Your life could be so much simpler without me in it." "Blackburn, Dawson, they see me as a threat because I know too much. Being with me could bring you more danger." Scarlett leaned into his touch, her decision made long before this moment. "I don't want simple, Xavier, I want you. Whatever comes with that danger, difficulties, we'll face it together." The last of Xavier's restraint crumbled. He drew her closer, one arm encircling her waist while his other hand remained gentle on her cheek. "I've wanted to do this since I first saw you stand up to Dawson," he murmured, his face inches from hers. "Then stop talking," Scarlett whispered, "and do it." Their first kiss was tentative, a gentle exploration that quickly deepened as months of unspoken feelings found expression at last. Scarlett's arms wound around Xavier's neck as he pulled her closer, the solid strength of him anchoring her in a moment that felt both inevitable and miraculous. When they finally parted, both breathless, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Scarlett Howard. I think I have from the moment I took your trunk at the depot and said I'd ride with you." Scarlett smiled, her heart fuller than she had ever thought possible. "And I love you, Xavier Porter, for everything you are and everything you've helped me become." The future still held challenges, Blackburn's threats, the ongoing struggle to make the ranch profitable, the harsh realities of frontier life. But in that moment, with the setting sun painting the Arizona sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, those challenges seemed manageable, even welcome, because they would face them together. 3 days later, Sheriff Davis rode out to the Broken P with news that changed everything. Dawson had been caught red-handed attempting to rustle cattle from a neighboring ranch. In exchange for leniency, he had confessed to his role in the attack on Xander Payne and implicated Blackburn as the one who had ordered both the rustling and the fire. "Blackburn's been arrested," the sheriff informed them, obvious satisfaction in his voice. "He's facing charges of conspiracy to commit murder, arson, and cattle rustling. With Dawson's testimony, he's likely to spend the rest of his life in prison." The relief that swept through the ranch was palpable. That evening, Miguel prepared a special meal to celebrate, and for the first time since Scarlett had arrived at the Broken P, there was music and laughter in the bunkhouse as Tom played his fiddle and Sam sang old trail songs. In a quiet moment during the celebration, Xavier took Scarlett's hand and led her outside, where the stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "With Blackburn and Dawson both facing justice, the greatest threat to the ranch is gone," he said, his expression more relaxed than she had ever seen it. "You could sell now if you wanted. Return to Boston with enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your life." Scarlett looked up at him, wondering if he still harbored doubts about her commitment to this life and to him. "Do you think that's what I want?" Xavier shook his head, a smile playing at his lips. "No, I think you've found your home here, just as I have." "I have," Scarlett confirmed, squeezing his hand. "But there's something missing, something that would make it perfect." "Oh," Xavier raised an eyebrow. "And what might that be?" "A husband," Scarlett replied simply. "I came to Arizona to be a bride after all. And while the groom has changed, my desire for a partner in life hasn't." Xavier's eyes widened slightly, then softened with emotion. "Scarlett Howard, are you proposing to me?" "I believe I am," Scarlett said, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "I love you, Xavier Porter. I want to build a life with you here at the Broken P. Will you marry me?" Xavier's answer came in the form of a kiss so tender and full of promise that words were unnecessary. But when they finally parted, he gave her the words anyway, his voice husky with emotion. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." 2 weeks later, they were married in the small church in Jerome, the same building that sometimes served as a schoolhouse. The entire town turned out for the event, curious to witness the union of the Eastern mail order bride who had defied expectations, and the loyal ranch foreman, who had stood by her through every challenge. Scarlett wore a simple white dress ordered from a catalog and delivered just in time for the ceremony. Xavier, uncomfortable in his Sunday best but handsome nonetheless, waited for her at the altar with a mixture of nervousness and joy that made Scarlett's heart swell. The ranch hands served as groomsmen, each of them having become like family over the months of working together. Even Jed, gruff as ever, had tears in his eyes as he watched Scarlett walk down the aisle on Dr. Sullivan's arm, the doctor having agreed to give her away in the absence of her father. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, promises to love, honor, and cherish each other through whatever life might bring. And when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up from the assembled guests echoed through the small church and out into the streets of Jerome. The celebration continued back at the ranch, where the newly completed house hosted its first gathering. Friends from town, neighboring ranchers, and the Broken Pea Hands all joined in the festivities, which lasted well into the night. As the last guests departed and the ranch settled into silence, Xavier carried Scarlett across the threshold of their home, no longer just a house, but the heart of their shared future. Later, as they lay in each other's arms in the master bedroom, moonlight streaming through the windows, Xavier had insisted on making larger than was typical, so you can always see the stars. Scarlett reflected on the journey that had brought her here. "I was so afraid that day at the depot," she murmured, tracing the contours of her husband's face with gentle fingers. "Afraid of the unknown, afraid of making a mistake, afraid of being alone in a strange place." Xavier caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "And now?" Scarlett smiled, feeling the rightness of where she was and who she was with down to her very bones. "Now I'm exactly where I'm meant to be with exactly the right person. I'm no longer afraid of what might come, because whatever it is, we'll face it together." "Together," Xavier agreed, drawing her closer. "Always together." 5 years later, the Broken Pea had grown to become one of the most successful ranches in the territory. The herd had doubled in size, and the quality of the cattle was renowned throughout the region. The original bunkhouse had been expanded to accommodate additional hands needed for the larger operation, and a small schoolhouse had been built on the property for the children of married workers who now had cabins of their own. Scarlett, now known throughout Jerome and beyond as one of the shrewdest businesswomen in Arizona, had expanded the ranch's operations to include breeding horses, an enterprise Xavier oversaw with the same dedication he brought to every aspect of their shared life. But the greatest joy of those 5 years was playing in the front yard of the main house their 3-year-old son, Thomas, named after Scarlett's father, and his 1-year-old sister, Elizabeth, named after Xavier's mother. The children had Xavier's blue eyes and Scarlett's determination, a combination that both delighted and exhausted their parents. On a crisp autumn afternoon, as Scarlett sat on the porch watching Xavier teach Thomas to ride his first pony, she reflected on how completely her life had transformed from what she had once expected. The mail-order bride who had been afraid to leave the depot had become a wife, mother, and successful rancher, respected in a community that had initially viewed her with skepticism. Xavier looked up, catching her gaze, and the love that passed between them was as strong and sure as it had been on their wedding day. With a smile, he lifted Thomas from the pony and set him on his shoulders, carrying him toward the porch where Scarlett sat with Elizabeth on her lap. "Mama," Thomas called excitedly. "Did you see? I rode all by myself." "I did see, darling," Scarlett replied, her heart full at the sight of her family. "You're going to be a fine horseman just like your father." Xavier sat beside her, placing Thomas between them while reaching out to stroke Elizabeth's soft cheek as she dozed in her mother's arms. "Happy," he asked softly, his eyes meeting Scarlett's over their children's heads. Scarlett leaned forward to kiss him gently, then sat back with a contented sigh. "More than I ever dreamed possible," she answered truthfully. "This life, this home, these children, it's everything I never knew I wanted until I found it." Xavier's smile was as warm as the Arizona sun. "And to think, it all started because a mail-order bride was afraid to leave the depot, and a cowboy took her trunk and said, 'I ride with you.'" "Best decision I ever made," Scarlett said softly, "letting you take that trunk." "Best decision I ever made," Xavier echoed, "offering to ride with you." As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in the vivid colors that had become so familiar and beloved to Scarlett, the Porter family sat together on the porch of their home, secure in the knowledge that the journey they had begun that day at the Jerome depot had led them exactly where they were meant to be together, building a legacy of love on the wild frontier of Arizona.